Over the past several days, 3 females have been found dead.
Looks like someone's going after these girls.
Then they have to know to watch their backs.
Streaming now.
You really want what happened if this woman happened to you?
Exactly why I need to keep going on this.
Starring Emmy Award winner Amanda Seyfried.
I'm worried about what you're gonna find.
So am I.
Long Bright River. A limited series. Streaming now. Only on Peacock.
I was never really a runner. The way I see running is a gift, especially when you have stage 4 cancer. I'm Anne. I'm running the Boston Marathon, presented by Bank of America. I run for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute to give people like me a chance to thrive in life, even with cancer.
Join Bank of America in helping Anne's cause. Give if you can at BofA.com/supportAnne. What would you like the power to do? References to charitable organizations is not an endorsement by Bank of America Corporation. Copyright 2025.
Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. So this is one of my favorite times where I meet with a gay and lesbian review contributing writer, in this case, a very prolific writer. So I need to give him his accolades. I'm with Felice Picano, who is the author of more than 30 books of poetry, fiction, memoirs, nonfiction, and plays. His work has been translated into many languages. Several of his titles are national and international bestsellers. He is considered a founder of modern gay literature, quite a, hefty weight to carry, along with the other members of the Violet Quill, which we're going to go all into. He also began and operated the Seahorse Press and Gay Presses of New York. I especially love Calamus Press because of my Whitman scholarship for 15 years. His first novel was a finalist for the Penn and Hemingway Award. Since then, he's been nominated for and won dozens of literary awards. And currently, he is in Los Angeles, where he also teaches at Antioch College. So welcome, Felice, to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room.
Thank you, Andrew.
So I have to ask you first just about the Violet Quill, because I feel like it'll launch 1,000 conversations, which in 2021 from the Gay and Lesbian Review, I loved David Bergman's article, kind of looking at that 40-year perspective of the Violet Quill Club. Just for our listeners out there, how did the Violet Quill get started? What was its premise when you first joined, and, bringing us into this literary society of sorts?
Okay, so it was 1978, and there were 7 of us, and we were all friends, lovers, or boyfriends, right? Andrew Holleran knew Robert Farrell and Michael Rumley, who were longtime lovers, and he knew them from the Iowa Writers' Workshop. I knew Edmund White socially, and Chris Cox, who was his boyfriend at the time, socially. And about a year and a half before that, I started dating George Whitmore. So we were all connected up like that. And we were really just looking for other gay writers to discuss what gay writing, what gay literary fiction would be, could be, and how we would go about doing it. And we needed someone to share, to listen to what we were writing, because nobody around us, and Edmund had a whole bunch of fancy literary friends, and they said, gay writing, that must be pornography, And so really nobody took it seriously. So we wanted to read our new and evolving work to each other. And that was the main focus of the group.
Well, and you...
7 of us would read, we would meet once every couple of weeks, and all 7 of us would read something and discuss it.
Well, and you had just come out with one of your best-selling books, right? As had Andrew Holleran, from what I remember. I mean, Andrew Holleran had Dancer from the Dance. And then what novel had you just come out with, Felice?
The Lure, yeah, I'd come out with The Lure.
And what is the premise of The Lure? Like, what's the narrative centered on?
Well, what it's based on are a series of articles that were written in the Village Voice about serial gay murders in New York City in 1976 1977. And the story had been dropped, but I had picked it up, and initially I was going to try to offer it to movie companies, and in fact I did initially offer it to movie companies. I was also, besides being in New York, and none of the Violet Quill Club knew until many years later. I was also bi-coastal and working out in Hollywood doing script writing and stuff like that. This was all, below literary level. So I would just say I'm out in the sun, but I offered it as a movie, and nobody really picked it up. And I mentioned it to my editor in New York, who had done 3 of my books very successfully. Before that, Linda Gray, wonderful editor, and she said, Felice, if you can't do a movie, it's a book.
Mm. Well, and it's so funny because I'm not sure if you saw American Horror Story, New York City, but a few years ago, it all centered on the TV show queer men in mostly Hell's Kitchen or even Greenwich Village, and they were at the bars, and it was all about these murders and like the luring of cruising.
Yeah.
So I think you were ahead of the curve, Felice.
In many ways, Andrew. Not always a comfortable position to be in, I have to say.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, you faced so many obstacles, and especially really being at that forefront of taking risks and chances. What even really led you into that creative writing space? Because I know you grew up on Long Island, and then you would every year go to the Radio City Christmas Spectacular.
Absolutely. Yeah. I ended up living in Manhattan when I was in college. I went to Queens College of the City of New York, New York University, City of University of New York. And most of the time that I was in college, I was living in Alphabet City with a roommate in a $55.40 apartment, rental a month apartment. But other people from Queens College moved into that area too. So there was, because nobody, it was dorms away from home type of thing. So I was interested in Manhattan from a very early age and lived in there while I was still in my teens.
Was it really?
I had just turned 20 when I graduated college.
Was it really that, Rent portrayal? Like, I'm sure Rent the musical and how centered it is on Alphabet City in the 90s and that whole bohemian artistry. Is that an accurate portrayal, or do you feel like they really fantasized elements?
Well, I moved out in 1977. I moved out of Alphabet City because I was being robbed like every month. And it had turned in the 60s, the mid 60s and the late 60s. It was wonderful. By 1968, 69, it had become a drug paradise, and it attracted exactly the wrong type of people. And, it was not really livable at that point. I don't know what happened there in the 90s. By the 80s and 90s, there was a really great scene. And Calamus Press, for example, came out of that scene. Larry Mitchell lived there. There were all these people there who were artistic and were writers. And there was theater there. It really was quite a wonderful scene. So it was wonderful in one way when I was there, went to hell for about 5, 6, maybe 10 years, and then popped up again. So Rent is sort of accurate, yeah.
Yeah. And now it's a very expensive place to live. So things have turned around. I went to a party there a few years ago. But so Calamus Press, what I'm really have to ask you with my own research is, are you indebted to Walt Whitman? Like, where did the name, how did that enter your psyche?
Well, I whenever when I was teaching poetry, even the first time I taught poetry somewhere in New York as a guest lecturer, I always began the course with Walt Whitman and with his homoerotic poems, which nobody seemed to know. And we're talking about in the 80s and 90s. I would start, okay, let me read these poems. Bum, bum, bum. And then there was like a whole series of them. People would come up to me afterwards and say, who knew? I said, yeah, they don't select those when they're doing selective poems. Anyway, so he was always very important to me. And I love the fact that he was an opera queen and that he would cruise. He had a boyfriend who was a bus driver, an omnibus driver. And he just seemed so contemporary to me as a figure, that I really felt close to him. Plus, when I did a reading with Allen Ginsberg at Hunter College, pretty early in my life, it was he and I and two women poets, and he had invited me to join it. He spent the time that the women who went first, when they were there reading, which was about almost an hour, he spent most of that time trying to seduce me. I looked younger, always looked younger than I was, and he liked younger people. And I think that the great line was that if we could trace back all the guys who had slept with everyone, it went back past Oscar Wilde and to Walt Whitman. And I said, that's a great pickup line. I believe you're on next.
Are your ulcerative colitis symptoms proving difficult to manage? Tremfya guselkumab can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. At 1 year, many patients taking Tremfya achieved clinical remission, and some patients also achieved endoscopic remission. Individual results may vary. Tremfya is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with moderately to severely active ulcerative colitis. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Ask your doctor if Tremfya can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. Call 1-800-526-7736 to learn more, or visit tremfyaradio.com.
This episode is brought to you by Walmart. New beauty is in bloom at Walmart, and it's all about springtime radiance. From Drybar, Tula Skincare, and hundreds more available online, Walmart has the premium brands you want and this season's on-trend products for flawless, glossy hair and hydrated skin. Big name beauty brands? Check. The things you love? Check. Find trending spring beauty and all you need to look and feel gorgeous at Walmart, on app and online.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm now writing a book proposal for my dissertation, but it's called Whitman's Queer, The Pool of Narcissus, Walt Whitman's Homoerotic Poetics. And I open with Oscar Wilde and Whitman in Camden, New Jersey. So it's really interesting. I'm curious, like my work is all about the ancient Greek influences on Whitman and like how that really speaks for same-sex desire without trying to categorize him as gay and like falling into all these biographical traps that can happen and instead just see, like you've expressed in all of your work, that queer male desire has been existing. It doesn't have to always be blatantly named. Like, the poetry exists, and like we have to breathe that type of air of just understanding the different relationships. But I'm like so curious. Your whole life, it feels, still, of course, Felice ongoing, is like a who's who in the literary scene. And I mean, to think of you with Allen Ginsberg and his poem, A Supermarket in California, it's almost as if you were the grocery boy that speaker is eyeing. I mean, what was it
Not
like?
quite.
Not quite. Okay. But
it's interesting. I was born in 1944. So next week I'm going to be 80 years old. And what that's all about is that I was born at an age where I was young and attractive enough that I met Gore Vidal, Tennessee Williams, Truman Capote, just everybody who was around at that time, because they would look around and see this, cute guy and okay, you come join us over here, type of thing. So I ended up actually meeting so many interesting people that would not have happened otherwise. And so I feel like I'm on some sort of a cusp here. And the same thing working in Rizzoli before I became a published author. Over there I met, the world at that time walked into that bookstore. So I was very lucky in that regard, and I enjoyed it. But to go back to Calamus Press, here's the background of Gay Presses of New York. I started what it turns out to be the first gay publishing company in the world in early 1977, the Seahorse Press. I chose the seahorse as the symbol because the seahorse is one of a few creatures in nature where the male actually give birth. So it was all about creative males, right? And a couple of years later that year, a man named Larry Mitchell began a press called Calamus Press. So he's the founder of Calamus. A year and a half later, Terry Helbing, who was in gay theater, or what was developing as gay theater, started JH Press. And a year later, we met and began Gay Presses of New York. So the whole thing, I became the editorial director, but it took two of us to bring in a new book under this new imprint. And the first book that we brought in under the new imprint of Gay Presses of New York was an unfinished trilogy by this guy nobody knew called, and it was Torch Song Trilogy. So we were in the black from day two, essentially. And I ended up running the presses when both of my partners eventually failed in health. And so that's my connection to it. I was the general liaison for the presses while continuing to run my own company. But when Terry had an accident and went into a coma, I ended up running JH Press. And when Larry started going blind, I ended up running Calamus Press, which, by the way, is back in print in some form, in that his book, The Faggots and Their Friends Between Revolutions, has been republished in exactly the same format as originally. And that was the big bestseller of Calamus Press.
Wow. Well, yeah, the unknown person Felice is talking about is Harvey Fierstein, of course. Right. And I hope Harvey has a large dedication to you in his new memoir, Felice.
Well, he mentions us. I mean, we're just the smart along his path to success, but that's okay. He mentioned us nicely. More importantly, however, is that when he won the Tony Award, got up on television and thanked his producers, but also thanked the three of us who, as he said, had faith in his play before anyone else. And in fact, when it came to us, it was two plays that had been produced and one that he was still finishing. So I ended up editing those plays 3 times.
Yeah, I saw the revival that had encompassed them together, brought the whole trilogy together. It was very well done. So yeah, the who's who list of you being at Rizzoli Books, what neighborhood was that in, Felice?
That was in the Diamond neighborhood.
Oh, interesting.
It was, in fact, it was called the Diamond Corner of New York City in Manhattan, and it was 53rd Street and 5th Avenue, because it was an L.
Yes.
The store in L. And Harry Winston, Tiffany, just all the famous diamond stores were around us. And in fact, we shared a basement wall with Harry Winston. So it was the Diamond Corner, where now the Trump Tower was Georg Jensen, the glass and high-end home store. So that's where it was, and people would meet there and then go to dinner.
Oh, okay. So is that why?
At one point in the evening, just before I was going home, Maria Callas appeared as though out of nowhere, all dressed up, looking like an advertisement. And she was obviously meeting someone there to go to dinner, which she did,
So that's why you would have Jackie Onassis, Bette Midler, Jerome Robbins, like why there was just so many different artists
Gregory
coming
Peck,
together.
Anthony Quinn, Dali, I.M. name it. I ended up selling furniture in the gallery, a Dubuffet suite of furniture in the gallery to Elton John for his new chateau and stuff like that. I mean, it was crazy. Yeah.
Do you feel like we've lost those kinds of touchstone spaces in this digital age? Because I feel like it would be hard to have a who's who in the art scene in that concentrated way.
It's interesting because that maybe is true. But you know what we had? I'm not sure about that, whether we've lost that. New York was definitely a center there. And when I became friends with a variety of older people, they said, well, this was like, Paris was like this in 1926. And I'm sure if you went back to Paris in 1895 or London in 1860, there were these moments where all the talent came together in one place. What I do know we have lost for sure is Bohemia, the Bohemia of rent and of New York City in the 70s and 80s. And that has gone. But there is a visual representation of much of it, which was done by a young photographer from Texas who was doing the first MFA in photography at the University of Texas at Austin. And he came to New York City because he wanted people to pose in bathtubs, and nobody would in Texas. But of course, everybody would in New York City. So I got a call from one person and posed in the airport in the bathtub. I sent him off to Robert Mapplethorpe, who posed, who sent him off to Divine, to Cookie Mullet, to this one and that one and that one and that. And now there's a show of that ever since. That has gone around the world. When I was in Reykjavik in 2004, doing a travel piece, a travel cover for Iceland, which was just getting hot at that time, there were life-size photos of me in a bathtub and Divine in some art gallery there. And it keeps coming back, So if you look at that, that was a Bohemia that could not be assembled all over again, and never again, I think.
Yeah. Well, so what are some of the lessons or maybe things that surprised you from, being around your whole life, just the arbiters of style or the cutting edge avant-garde scene? Like, what did you learn from just being in this proximity? I mean, did it just help influence and shape your own creative style?
I don't know. I'm not sure about that at all. I'm not sure what you mentioned in your email about influencers, like influencers from W.H. Auden. Well, I have to tell you, I knew him socially. We became nice friends, not great friends, nice friends. I never talked to him about being a writer. He was not really interested in that. So I knew him in a social basis, He didn't really influence me in any way. I didn't start reading him in any kind of depth until after he passed, frankly. He had gotten two big jobs around the time that I met him, just a couple of years before he went back to Europe, which was pretty much a disaster for him, by the way. He hated being in England. He had lived for 40 years on the Lower East Side, on St. Mark's Place. He was used to young people. He was used to, being able to walk up to somebody and start talking to them. He was treated like some sort of a Buddha, as he said, once he got to Oxford. And It was just awful. He would, on Saturday nights, he would go into town. He's just telling me this on the telephone. He would go into town looking for American tourists to talk to, literally, you know. It was sad. It was sad. But before that, he had gotten the New York Times, New Yorker had asked. They said that you're on retainer. Any poem you write, we'll publish. The New York Review of Books said any essay you write, will publish. And so Orland Fox, who was his amanuensis, would throw these dinner parties, and a whole bunch of us would go, and Auden would throw out some question or topic, and everybody would talk about it. And a month later, we'd see all of our opinions in these articles in New York Review of Books. He never read his poetry to us, you know. Yeah. And if anything, we talked a lot about music, geology. He was very interested in geology. I met the Stravinskys at his place, and we talked about that, you know. So that's what it's like. So my influences, I think, and I'm actually writing a big book of essays these days called Dickens at the Beach and Other Essays. And it's about the 5 or 6 writers that had the most amount of influence on me, because I did a lot of reading in depth pretty quickly once I started reading. And Henry James, Thomas Mann, Balzac, they only read in Europe nowadays. And very early on, also Dickens, you know. So these are my influences. Dickens taught me a lot. Henry James taught me. Thomas Mann taught me. They all taught me as a writer what to do. And I didn't realize that until 40 years later. Yeah. Capote, on the other hand, I read as his books were coming out, and I'm sure he had some sort of influence. I really do consider him a major writer. Somebody reviewing one of my books compared me to him, and I sent them flowers.
That's incredible.
Of his writing, you know.
Well, and it's so interesting because I loved your November-December article about, you were reviewing a fictional piece of Truman Capote, a novel that had come out, but like
Stephen Greco's wonderful novel, Such Good Friends, which I recommend.
Yeah, well, and now I'm sure you know Lawrence Lemur's Capote's Women has really like taken off because of the Feud show, which I'm watching, and kind of the way you've described W.H. Auden. It seems like Capote, I mean, he was a very extroverted personality. I mean, it seems just from even how they're portraying him, but he was really using this high society group of women to gain insight and psychological knowledge for his narratives, or just material. Like,
I would agree with that. Yeah.
So that's a pretty fair portrayal, you feel, of what he was like in the social scenes.
Yeah. His lover, Jack Dumphy, saw the introverted side of him. I mean, I lecture, I teach, I do all kinds of things that are extroverted. But of course, I have an introverted side, which allows me to just close out the world and do writing. And Capote was like that. When we talk about stuff, the one time that I really had a long conversation with him, we talked about that. I said, fuck these ladies, do your writing,
And said, that's going to be the quote of the interview. But I mean,
really, I mean, it was, he was an abused and neglected child. He really was. I mean, and his parents were, deeply neglectful and not very nice to him in terms of boosting his ego. So he had to do it by himself. And I think that's the key to Truman and his life. But his work really stands apart from that. He was able to focus on some really important issues. But the whole thing with these society ladies was, oh, they like me, they like me, they like me.
Yeah, well, they're like calling the show the first Real Housewives. That they really, pulled the strings of society and like their in-group fighting and issues to the outside. People would say, what's the big deal? Like they're fighting over a bill at a restaurant or like who's going to be hosting the next gala. But like to them, that was the biggest high
Their life.
stakes issue. Yeah, that's their life.
That was their, yeah. But his life was bigger than theirs,
Mm-hmm.
It's
Well,
interesting. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
It's interesting because I met, some of those people, especially at one point, Rose Kennedy was coming into the store because she was doing her memoirs up the street at Doubleday. And she walked in the store one day and I was up in the manager's office doing something. They called me down and she said, my daughter-in-law, Jackie Kennedy, tells me you're wonderful about photographs and I have to have photographs for my thing, for my autobiography, and I don't trust that woman. I Doubleday to choose them. So she opens this thing and spreads out all these photos. I write about this and we go through them and we're talking about them. She came in a couple of other times, and one time she was in there and she said, is that Mrs. Rockefeller there? And there was Mrs. John D. Rockefeller III. Particular people would come in for particular things. She liked European faience of the 18th century. That was her thing. A new book would come in, we'd call her up, she'd come in. So she happened to be there. And Rose says to me, we met, but she probably doesn't know who I am. Could you introduce me to her? So there I am introducing Rose Kennedy to Mrs. John D. Rockefeller III. And I invite them up to the art gallery where we have, coffee set up there. So they go up there and they have coffee. Who does this happen to, this type of stuff,
Well, it sounds like a scene from Southampton. Like to me, that's where when I've been to the Hamptons, those types of connections and networking, like Truman really got thrown in the network and
tossed in,
yeah. And that was a life raft for him of sorts. Well, and you spent so many, I'm sure you still, have a foot in the pines, but I'm a huge fan of Fire Island because I live on Long Island, only 30 minutes away in Port Jefferson Village. And
on the North Shore.
On the North Shore, yes. Were you a North Shore or South Shore Long Islander, Felice?
Well, both actually, because we summered on the North Shore several years when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And Locust Valley, a place, a sort of high-end little enclave called Locust Valley. And interestingly enough, when I was 15, 16 years old, I met a bunch of those rich kids there, because part of being, my father was he was expanding his business. He was a grocer who expanded into wholesale warehousing and catering to airlines and big hotels and everything. And he was looking for an investor, and he found one who wanted to invest in his business to expand it. And the guy said, I have this house in Locust Valley. Nobody uses it. Why don't your family use it during the summer? So we ended up there a couple of summers. And along with it came the keys to the beaches and the clubs and everything. So I ended up, me and my sister ended up hanging out with all these rich kids.
I love Locust Valley. But and then I'm sure like how Huntington Village, like they have such an LGBTQ scene with Cinema Arts Center, and there's a lot now happening on Long Island, which is wonderful. But did you feel that with the Pines? When did you first start going to the Pines? Like, how different was this? Okay. Almost like a fantasy, I'm assuming, from you being from, the main shore of Long Island.
Right. I knew it was there. I first went out to the straight communities with people I was working with at the East End Welfare Center. I was a welfare worker for 2 years, and I was in a group of very active and also psychoactive, because they all took drugs. You know, we all took drugs for a very long time. And we went out to the straight communities there. And I was out there for 2 summers and had a great time and enjoyed it. But the women in the house, the second year, said, "We hate this single scene here. We just want to go out dancing without being hit. Let's go to Cherry Grove." So we would all pile into beach taxis, take our drugs, and go dancing in Cherry Grove, you know. And there were signs on the wall there that said no more than 3 men to each woman on the dance floor. And we would appear with 5 women. And so we were very popular. So I got to see that scene, and it was interesting. It looked interesting, but I was only there at night, you know, during those years. And then I went out to Fire Island Pines because a friend of a friend, an older guy who was a stockbroker, had a house at Fire Island Pines. And we ended up going for a week, sometimes 4 days, 3 days. And so I got to see it then. It was in transition then from a family community, which it had been originally, into a gayer community. It was not usually gay then. By 1973, there was a large gay community there. And that's when the big theme parties started happening. There were, every year for 15 years, there were enormous theme parties. They attracted people from outside of Fire Island, as well as people in Fire Island. And that was by 1975, when I started renting a house out there during the whole summer. It was what I call the class of 75. There were many, many gay men there. I'd say more than half at that point. And from then until 1985, that was true.
Well, I was going to say, like, my knowledge of the difference between Cherry Grove and the Pines history is the Pines was like very white gay male oriented, where Cherry Grove was more of like the integrated lesbian, gay, bisexual, a little more free flowing with like identity. Is that like an accurate portrayal?
It's an accurate portrayal. There was, despite what people said, there was lots and lots of partying going on at Fire Island Pine. A lot of it was private. We had 2 Islip PD policemen there. We ended up partying with them, both in Fire Island Pines during the week, and my lover and I came upon them, Julio and Red, came upon them in New York City one weekend, and they said, "Where are you going?" And we said, "We're going to Flamingo. Come on, come in, be our guest." So they came to Flamingo with us. You know, and they were straight. These were straight, handsome, good-looking guys. They got a lot of women, but they were straight, you know. So it really was a party activity there, a great deal, and lots of sex, you know.
Well,
you couldn't believe how much.
Well, and I know like the, you know, top like fashion designers. I'm trying to remember whose house was in the Pines.
Oh yeah. Calvin Klein and Holston were my neighbors. Yeah, you know.
Wow. So, you know, when they were there, or that artist or fashion community, the who's who of the gay scene, you know,
Tommy
again,
Jones came out there, you know, James Levine from the opera.
Yeah, but were they very, like you said, the Pines was a very private place. Like they weren't really trying to like talk to everyone on the island.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
But the thing is, there was a great intermesh between the 2 communities, because many of us would go dancing Saturday night in the Ice Palace in Cherry Grove. and that was the place to be on a Saturday night. And a lot of them would come back to the Pines for the Sunday tea dance, which began attracting, straight people from all over Fire Island and from Long Island too. So these things became institutionalized pretty quickly,
So what is that origin, Felice? Because I've gone to the tea dance last summer. I was there with my now boyfriend. We weren't dating then, but we're now dating. So yeah, why is it called the tea dance? Like, what is that whole ritual about?
Well, tea dances came from the 1920s. It's interesting. When I was going to Studio 54, me and my lover would see this couple in their 60s, a woman in great condition, tall, slender guy in great condition, and they'd be out there dancing and doing swing dancing and things like that. This is at Studio 54. Nobody talks about this, right? One day we sat there on the banquette and I said, "Why are you here? How are you here?" And they said, "This is the best dancing at this time since the 30s and 40s when we were young and dancing." So it's like eras, there's a cyclical thing. And I think that's what was happening in Fire Island. There was something going on in the Grove there in the 20s, 30s, in the 30s. In fact, Arden told me that it wasn't as big as what it became, but the cycle came back again, hit in the middle of the 1970s, and it took off again in the city also.
Wow. Well, I've stayed at the Belvedere twice, so I need to know, Felice, what was the Belvedere like when you were, first at Cherry Grove, or like what was even its legacy? Like, was it something people talked about a lot?
Well, it was a wonderful, strange looking place. It was terrific. I only saw it when I went home with people who were staying there, living there, which was more than once. It was supposedly built, during that first hot period of the Cherry Grove, and I'm not sure, there was a legend about it, but I don't really remember the legend. You'll probably know that better than I.
Yeah. Well, I know they were trying to, the owner. I mean, I know the owner, the new owner, Julius, but I remember that it was all curated to like really try to replicate like the Italian mansion, like almost an ancient Roman.
You're right. You're right. Yeah. I vaguely remember that. Yeah.
So there's like a lot of like ancient Roman or Italian art spread throughout the place.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, but it's still, going strong.
Okay.
Yes. The Ice Palace has a new pool that they've put in. So yeah.
That's good.
It's good.
Was the greatest. The greatest dancing me and my dance partners ever did was there and in Flamingo probably.
Yeah.
The Saint was another place.
Yeah.
I guess it was a party generation,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like, a book that I just really, I mean, you have such a storied literary career, and you're still writing, as we all know. One of my favorites, though, from 2007 is when you wrote Art and Sex in Greenwich Village. And like, I just am so curious because a place we haven't talked about yet is Greenwich Village, which is actually interesting because people think of Stonewall, they think of all like these LGBTQ monuments in Greenwich Village. So like, what is your relationship to such a queer male space in Manhattan?
So I was still pretty young when I moved there. I moved there from Alphabet City and promptly went to Europe for a year. And and my ex-girlfriend from high school and her new husband lived there and commuted to Princeton, right? Where they were teaching. And so I came back there in, I guess, 1967. And to give you an idea of what it was like, the first week, maybe the second week when I was back, it was a beautiful day. I was walking around, getting to take a look at it. And this very attractive blonde guy topped me up, pushed me into a doorway and started necking with me and said, "You want to go to a party?" And I said, I'll go wherever you take me. And so he took me to this party in one of the tall buildings on either side of Jane Street. And we got into it. There was a gay cocktail party taking place there, mostly older guys. He dragged me into the bedroom and I thought, okay, here we go. And there was this other guy there. He left me there and the other guy blew me.
Wow.
And that guy was
go.
Frank O'Hara.
Frank O'Hara. Oh,
that
wow.
was Frank O'Hara. And the people, and then he said, go enjoy yourself at the party. There's some nice people there. And maybe he blew somebody else. I don't know. At any rate, most of the people at the party were older, but there were a couple of people that I'd met before there. So I hung out with them. About a month later, I bumped into Frank on the street and he said, I guess he had seen me with some of my friends there or seen me on the street. And he said, there's a big party going on at Robert Indiana's tomorrow night. Here's the address. He wrote it, made me turn around, wrote it on my back. Here's the address. Bring some of your cute friends. And so this was down in the Bowery. We took a cab. We went down there and the whole art scene of that moment was there.
Wow. Wow. Well, and then sadly,
there were so few gay people out and so few who were even half out, like those artists, that you could really know everybody and associate with everybody.
Yeah. Well, so like what were the top spots, in Greenwich Village, or like where were you really going? To the bars, to the clubs?
There were 3 or 4 bars, boots and saddles, which we call bras and girdles. There was the Eagle's Nest. Well, that was up in Chelsea. The Eagle's Nest. Those were standbys. There were just a lot of bars open at the end of Christopher Street. There were 2 or 3 bars down there. The whole of Greenwich Village was a cruising scene. I mean, there was just no two ways about it. From Fifth Avenue to the Hudson River, from 14th Street down to Washington Square, it was just solid cruising scene, pickup scene, and bars, restaurants, a lot of restaurants and cafes, theaters. There were all these little theaters. Theater de Lille, there were 2 or 3 other ones that were there. So it was just a gay neighborhood, which changed,
Yeah. Well, and now, like, I was so curious about, I'm not sure if you're reflecting this in your new collection of essays, but like, what do you think about the idea of the neighborhood, or even I grew up in South Jersey. So like I would go a lot to Philly's neighborhood, which like still has a strong presence, but there's Lambertville.
Is Woody's still there?
Woody's is there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. But there's Lambertville, there's New Hope, there's Asbury Park. So like things have really spread out, I feel, with like LGBT communities.
Good.
But do you feel like New York City, in some ways, I actually feel that their queer scene, I mean, it's spread throughout Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens.
Yeah.
Is there an importance to the neighborhood? Do you think that it's more important that
it came about because people wanted to be safe. Gays wanted to be safe. They wanted to be in a place where they felt safe, and where if I remember at one point there was this semi-institution called the Trucks, and these were open semi-trucks that were parked around 14th Street, way over by the Hudson River, and they would be emptied out and for the weekend, and gay people would go in there and have sex. And at one point, people were being attacked by kids from Chelsea, from the projects in Chelsea and Uptown, and we formed a sort of vigilante committee. And believe it or not, me and Marsha P. Brown were on Tuesday nights And she would be there with her, Afro comb, which was all points, a deadly Afro comb. And I'd be there with my cowboy boots, and I had a knife, steak knife in every pocket. And we would protect the trucks for Tuesday night from midnight to 3 p.m. or something, 3 a.m. or something like that. So we formed, it was a vigilante, literally, because people were being attacked. And so the people really did protect themselves. There were street communities when the city went broke in the 70s, 1977. There were street associations that started up. And in fact, it was through the Jane Street Association that I found out about all of those gay serial murders, right? That's how I found out about it. And I used my contacts there to get actual information, factual information, By the way, didn't you mention that you were reading my Victorian novel? Or you never did?
No, I'm not sure. What is your Victorian novel for everyone listening, Felice?
One of them is called Pursuit, Victorian Entertainment, and then its partner is Pursued, Lillian's story. Oh, yeah.
Yes. I'm going to. No, I'm about. Yes, I am going to read it. But what is the narrative, just so you can tease everyone to get their hands on it?
For a long time. Well, I've read probably every Victorian novel that arrived, but I became aware in doing that there were really two real sexual lives. There was the men's life, which was really open and free, and then the women's life, which was very, very limited. And I wanted to write about that. And I chose a narrative in which a woman in her 60s who lives in the countryside, and who was married to the Lord Exchequer of England, who resides in London, of course, vanishes one evening, and he sets one of his young men and to become detective and find out what happened to her. And that is Pursuit. And that is the story of this young man who goes in search of her. And he ends up, so we follow his life while he's doing that. And at the end of that, he does connect with her. And the second book is called Pursued. And it's the story of her supposedly golden marriage to this guy when she was 17, 18 years old, and the parson's daughter when he was, the Duke of this huge area, Ravenglass, So that's the narrative on that, her life as opposed to this young guy's life. And he grew up in a ghetto in East London, but was a beautiful child.
Yeah.
So he went through all kinds of things. So his is very Dickensian childhood, and hers is more Mary Ann Evans.
Yeah. So you are, like myself, a George Eliot, are you also a huge Victorian poetry fan? Because one of my favorites is Christina Rossetti and her brother. Like the Rossettis are probably some of my favorite poets from the Victorian period.
Yeah, I read them all. Yep.
Yeah. So, for everyone out there, Felice, how can they get their hands on all of your work? I know you have a great website.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. By 2025, all the novels will be back in print.
Oh, well, that's wonderful.
Right to my first book. I'm very indebted to two companies. Requeered Tales is one of them, which has been putting out all my fiction, and various other places. Beautiful Dreamer is putting out my 1985 autobiography. It's being published right now, called Ambidextrous: The Secret Lives of Children, a book that was burned on the docks of London when it was sent there. A very banned book, one of my two most banned books. And that's coming out again. Because it was analog and had to be digital, I actually ended up reading every single word, and I now understand why it was so controversial. It's ruthlessly honest.
What's your other most banned book, Felice?
I think like People in History of 1995, my most beloved books. When people come up to me and said, I read your book, it changed my life, it was either that or The Lure. Yeah.
Yeah, so FelicePicano.net is all things, Felice's work. My last question, I mean, we could keep going and going, but, I know you have a schedule. I have a schedule. Hopefully you come back again, Felice. This has been such a wonderful conversation. If you could now see where specifically gay male culture and the literary scene is, and how even in Hollywood, how embraced, say like a Saltburn or Call Me by Your Name, like how visible queer male stories are. What would you have thought about our current moment, say in the Rizzoli books? Did you imagine this is what would happen?
I hoped it was something that would happen. I mean, I was always openly gay. Really, from the moment I was gay, I was openly gay. I never was apologetic or anything like that. And I'm very, very glad people are waking up.
Yeah. Well, so what's your hope?
Are opposed to it, as we know.
Well, so what's your hope for the next 20 years if you had a magic wand?
I hope that all of the media, the visual media, become mature enough to actually turn some of my books into film and TV.
I would love that.
They're not there yet.
I've been hoping for a queer production company for a long time that would turn queer novels into films, just keep optioning these books.
One after another. Yeah.
But right, Hollywood costs a lot of money, as you know.
It does, I've got no problem with it. It paid my way for years when books didn't, so I'm happy about it.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Felice. And any way for people to contact you, or it's up to you. I don't know
on
if you have
my
social
website,
media.
On the right-hand side, it says contact me, and a lot of people do. Please do.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Felice. This has been a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, Andrew. And I'll be in New York City next week.
Wonderful. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Felice. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay. Bye-bye.